Hello everyone, just Goran here and welcome back to another NaturZoo real life inspiration video. Today we are looking at the black-tailed prairie dog, this adorable little critter from the North America animal pack. And we've got a lot of zoos to get through, so let's get started right away with the first zoo, which is the Aachener Tierpark. And we are getting started over here in I want to call it the North American section, but honestly this habitat used to be for something not more North American, I don't remember what. We've got a tree-cup porcupine enclosure on one side and then a prairie dog enclosure on the other. They, as far as I can tell, are not mixed, as you can tell by the holes in this enclosure and the grass in the other one. But yeah, it's a quite simple enclosure, very safe, barriers, definitely no way for them to climb out of that very easily. Small bit of shelter on the side, but that is really all there is to it. So let's immediately move on to the next zoo, and this one we're going to spend a bit more time in because it's a bit more substantial. We've got a walkthrough enclosure in Dierenpark Amersfoort. One thing that we already can't see anymore, that was just at the start, is that there is a separate path going around this enclosure, because this is a zoo where you can bring your dog, but of course you cannot bring your dog into the enclosure. First of all, the grate that you walk over to get into the enclosure is electrified, so your dog would not like that, and also you don't want your dog in a walkthrough enclosure. But yeah, walkthrough enclosures for black-tailed prairie dogs are very much a thing, at least here in Europe. So definitely something that is totally possible. I'm not sure what that's like in the States. If you're from the States, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know. But here's a very cool feature of Amersfoort. You've got this thing that has a lot of resistance, so you can just jump on that if you're a kid. If you're an adult like me, it goes a little faster than it probably should, but yeah, you can step on that and you will slowly go down. And I had a bit of a crash landing there, but down here we can hear prairie dog noises. Those aren't the actual prairie dogs, those are just little speakers in the walls, immersing you in the prairie dog experience, I guess you could say. It's a little bit annoying if you ask me, and it's much more cool if you actually hear the prairie dogs make noises like that, which I did experience in one other zoo, so we'll get to that eventually. But yeah, we've got a bit of a burrow section over here. What I really like about the one at Amersfoort, it's actually quite large, so even as an adult you can fit through, and you've got all these little pokey holes where you can peek out, see a snake that is just buried into there. But yeah, you can peek out of the holes like prairie dog and get that really awesome experience. And there you can see the little thing. I feel like it's supposed to be like an oil drill type ID, because America, oil, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I really like this enclosure a lot, and when I was here to record all this footage, there were a lot of babies around, so that was awesome. But yeah, that was it for Amersfoort, so let's move on to Van Blanckendaell Park, which has their prairie dogs in this little aviary over here. I did not see them, but they are signed, so we'll just have to assume that they're there. I mean, there are these little plastic tubes and stuff. There's also Lady Amherst pheasants, which are some of my favorite pheasants, but I don't know why they're sharing their enclosure with prairie dogs. I feel like the prairie dogs are able to move between some of these aviaries, perhaps. Really not sure, but it's an interesting enclosure, I guess. I mean, I guess it just goes to show that a tiny animal like the prairie dog, especially one that's not as aggressive, because of course prairie dogs I feel like are way less aggressive than something like a meerkat, so prairie dogs you can pretty much just put anywhere and it's probably fine. Here we are at Blijdorp, where we also have a walkthrough prairie dog enclosure. These gates over here that you can see are actually new. They did not used to have gates on this enclosure, but they added them, I guess. There may have been one or two too many escapes. Actually, there have been several escapes at Blijdorp. I'm not sure if it's through the gates or through digging. It's probably not through digging. You'd think they think far enough ahead to make it digging proof for an animal known for digging. But yeah, you can occasionally see prairie dogs on the bison yard, which is behind the enclosure over here, or in the vacuna yard, which is on the other side of it as well. So Probably they wanted to prevent that and they added the gates. But yeah, once again, we've got a lovely little enclosure. It's actually quite nicely decorated with some faux rock and stuff. And there is also a tunnel where you can go through and peek your head out the other side. But that one is a little bit too narrow for me to get through nowadays. I have done it in the past, but I really can't do it anymore. Or at least I would have to take my backpack off and stuff. That's just way too much effort. So next up, we have Tierpark Fossilium Bochum, and over here we can see this enclosure is actually netted over, and that's definitely not for the prairie dogs. That is not to prevent the prairie dogs from escaping, it's to prevent the prairie dogs from being eaten. Of course, being such small animals, they might become prey for birds of prey, and to prevent that, some zoos might net over enclosures for things like prairie dogs or meerkats or guinea pigs, stuff like that. Anyway, over here in the desert of Burgers Zoo, and we also saw this enclosure in the collared peccary video. This is a shared enclosure between the collared peccary, tree porcupine, and the prairie dog. We can see them over here climbing on the rocks, getting a nice view of the area around them, and very gracefully getting down again. So yeah, absolutely awesome enclosure. I am a really big fan of this one. You can also see the tree porcupine walking around down there. Very cool as well. But yeah, they've got some logs to kind of walk around. They can climb up the rocks, and they can burrow in the soil down here as well. So overall, a lot of stuff for the prairie dogs to do, and just an absolutely fabulous enclosure for the visitors to enjoy. But that's really all there is to say about this one. It's just great. Next up, we have the Eekhoorn Experience, or the Squirrel Experience, which is a small zoo, part of a garden shop in the Netherlands, in Etten near Breda. And over here we can see what looks like a prairie dog, but that's actually a European ground squirrel, if I'm not mistaken. I very well might be mistaken, because I couldn't really read the sign in the footage. But the reason I'm showing this one is because the enclosure is pretty much the exact same as the prairie dog enclosure right next to it, except that I've recorded this one a little bit better. So yeah, you've got little bits of shelter, a lot of sand for the animals to bury around in, and yeah, over here we can see the prairie dog enclosure. It's pretty much the exact same thing. What we can see is these little green balls over here. That is a little feed dispenser, and that is actually the only feed in the zoo that you're allowed to use for the prairie dogs, but you are allowed to use it. So around the zoo you can get food for the different squirrels of the Squirrel Experience, that you're allowed to give to all of them, except the prairie dogs, which you can only give those green balls. But this does make it the only zoo in this entire video where you're allowed to feed the prairie dogs. So I guess that's pretty special right there. But yeah, that's pretty much all we have to see here at the Eekhoorn Experience. So let's say bye-bye to the prairie dogs here and move on to the next zoo, which is going to be Faunapark Flakkee, another small zoo in the Netherlands, with some pretty interesting enclosures here and there. Overall, I like the vibes, although sometimes it's a bit jank, like we can see over here. It's a bit of a simple enclosure, very square, but I do like some of the theming that they tried to implement here. Just a little bit of a Wild Western type idea. I'm not sure how stereotypical that is, but especially in the back there is like a little campment, a little kitchen or whatever, and yeah, the prairie dogs have just a nice amount of space, things to bury around in, and overall not a lot to complain about here. There's also a mirror there, not sure why, but I remember liking that for some reason. Also, we can see some backstage in the back, or like a bit of shelter, just a shelter box really. Like you can see a lot of these prairie dog enclosures don't really have a indoor habitat, indoor area, just a box where they can go inside of. Anyway, this is Harry Malter, which also have a shared enclosure with the prairie dog and the North American tree porcupine. Will I ever pronounce porcupine correctly the first attempt? Maybe. Yeah, just another simple enclosure with some climbing for the porcupines, some soil. There's a bit of vegetation over there in the back, which gets my attention, because I'm always interested in seeing how much plants can I put in these enclosures of these rather destructive animals. But yeah, that was all there is to see over there at Malter. Next up we have Kabouterland, the Gnome Zoo. And why is it the Gnome Zoo? Well, why don't you have a look at this beautiful black-tailed prairie dog enclosure over here, featuring a bunch of gnomes. Isn't that amazing? It's not a bad enclosure. I really like the fact that it's like elevated, so you're actually a lot closer to the animals. You're not looking down on them completely, especially if you're a little kid. You're probably kind of almost at eye level with them, which is actually really cool. And then there's gnomes. Why not? It's a gnome zoo after all. Also the little backstage building over there. I think that leads to some kind of backstage at least. I think it's very cute. So I actually really like this enclosure. It's a bit flat, but other than that, it's absolutely awesome. Anyway, over here in Zoo de Lille, we are inside a tropical aviary, which is like a South American aviary, I want to say. And we've got things like ibis, I think actually several species of ibis, as well as the red-legged Surima over here, which is an absolutely awesome bird, which you don't often see in a walkthrough enclosure. I think, and the only other one I've seen is Zie-Zoo. But yeah, it was really cool to get up close with them. And that's an interesting movement right there. Anyway, enough about these birds. We're here to look at prairie dogs, and they are also in this tropical aviary for some reason. Why are we still looking at birds? I did not edit this. I'm just gonna keep that in, whatever. The video is long enough as it is. Yeah, here's a prairie dog enclosure inside of that aviary. Why is it in here? I don't know. But it is, and it's not the best one. There is some theming and shelter and things, also things for the birds to perch on. Are those Inca terns? No, I think they are. This is a weird collection of birds. I guess America. My god, it's never been this apparent that I'm just completely winging these videos, isn't it? Winging it. We're in an aviary. It's all coming full circle. Yeah, no, this is it's a box with some black stuff. I don't know, it's not very well designed or anything. It's like a sand pit that they threw some prairie dogs into, so it's not my favorite thing. But anyway, over here at Monde Sauvage, we got another giant tree for some reason, just like around the binturongs. But this one has a prairie dog enclosure inside of it with a double barrier for some reason, as if the barrier around the tree wasn't enough to contain. I don't know what's happening here, but I mean, you still get pretty decent views of them. It's just a really weird situation. I don't know why it's designed that way. While we're here, why don't we also take a look at this kind of North American theming around the corner. So we've got a totem pole, a bit of a jeep, and like a small encampment. That's interesting, I guess. I thought it was pretty cool to show you. Just theming, the types of theming that you might find at a zoo, I guess. So let's move on to the next zoo, which is going to be NaturZoo Rheine. And yeah, earlier we mentioned I like to look at how lush I can make my enclosures. Well, I wish I could tell you that this is how lush a prairie dog enclosure can be. But I'm sad to inform you that this enclosure, though it is for prairie dogs, the sign over here tells us that, I think due to an illness or something, the prairie dogs were temporarily not being shown over here. So the enclosure had been empty for a while, and that's probably the only reason why the foliage is as dense as it is. Though it looks really cool, yeah, you probably wouldn't have anything like this if you actually put prairie dogs in there. But I still really wanted to show this enclosure because I really did quite like it, especially this little bit of backstage that you can actually see from the viewing area is pretty interesting. I call it backstage, but it's not really backstage if it's part of the viewing area, I suppose. But also just the enclosure, it's very spacious, it's very nice. We got some education about burrows that I can't read because I don't speak German. Yeah, what I like about this enclosure is that it's not just flat, of course. That we have seen quite a few flat enclosures, but this one has some hills and some things throughout it. There's also this little viewing outcropping, where you can go through and peek your head into the enclosure. Not open up in this case, like with a lot of the walkthrough enclosures that we saw. But this one is made out of glass. It has been vandalized a little bit by the looks of it. It's also quite simple, like just it's a square, not like a bubble type thing. But the idea is still really cool. But that's it for NaturZoo Rheine. So let's move on to Zoo Osnabrück, which is probably one of the most unique ones in this video, because Osnabrück has a subterranean area, and that's what we're entering right over here. This is the subterranean zoo, and it basically has just a whole bunch of enclosures in the dark for things like naked mole rats. I think there's a bat enclosure, some rats, and of course, why else would it be in this video, the black-tailed prairie dog also have a enclosure in here. Now, it's very hard to film in complete pitch blackness, so excuse the poor quality of this footage, but this is the black-tailed prairie dog enclosure, so it's like integrated into the wall. You can kind of see into their burrow, supposedly. Of course, it's not an actual burrow because it's man-made. There's also these little lanterns lighting up the education signs, but really not much else. It is very dark in here, and you definitely need to watch your step. Anyway, as you get outside again, there is also an enclosure above the ground over here, where you can see they also have their own actual burrows, but I'm guessing the indoor area is like heated up or something, which is why they like to also sleep in there. Super awesome concept right here. Definitely very inspirational in my opinion. Yeah, one of the first very cool impressions that Zoo Osnabrück made on me when I visited, and it definitely became one of my favorites. Anyway, over here we have Ouwehands Dierenpark, where the prairie dogs are just kind of somewhere. Like, this is a pretty forgettable enclosure because it's just kind of here as a little bonus. It's not like part of the area. It's not very substantial. It's like, oh yeah, there's like a playground here, and let's put some animals around it, I guess, including the prairie dogs. So they've got an outdoor part, and then also over here on the inside, next to the large play area by the water over here, there is also an indoor yard, which is pretty much the exact same thing except inside, and there's some tropical plants here which probably wouldn't do too well outside. But yeah, it's a pretty cool enclosure, all things considered, but yeah, it's not really part of a larger whole or anything, which is why I feel like it's not that memorable to me personally. But anyway, next up we have Pairi Daiza, and in Pairi Daiza the prairie dogs are in the Oasis, which is a larger area, a greenhouse in the zoo with all sorts of small enclosures like meerkat or dwarf mongoose, a bunch of aviaries, and also the black-tailed prairie dog over here. So yeah, we can see them running around. Just a simple enclosure, quite nice rockwork, but it looks like it wasn't fully escape-proof because they have added some wooden planks over there to make them unable to get out of here. That very much looks like an afterthought, which is always pretty funny. Yeah, you can have all the budget in the world, but if you don't think about stuff like that, then you're gonna end up with something like this, I suppose. It's still a decent looking enclosure, and you can walk all the way around it, and also from this angle you get some views of the animals in there. But yeah, nothing super big or anything, so not much else to really talk about here. So let's move on to the next zoo, which is PlaswijckPark. They actually have quite an interesting layout because you have a walkthrough part of the enclosure, and then you can see this little bridge going over the water that goes to a separate little area where you cannot walk through, but the animals can get there, and you can view it from the side of the path. So it's also nice for people who don't want to go through the walkthrough part of the enclosure, and they can still experience these animals a little bit. But yeah, you as a guest can also go into the enclosure, crossing the bridge as well. Yeah, there you can see what that little separate area looks like. And then as you enter the enclosure, you also have some views of their indoor yards, containment boxes. Just very simple things. Yeah, as we've established at this point in the video, as far as indoor holding for these animals is concerned, you don't need anything too fancy. I guess they are pretty resistant to different types of weather, and I guess they can also just be let outside during the night, and they'll just be in their burrows, right? Like, I feel like they probably will just be fine. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to comment on that. Anyway, this is one of my favorites in this video. This is Zoo Veldhoven. And we've got this very simple enclosure over here. And this is not my favorite enclosure. This is just something really funny to me. So we can see we have some prairie dogs in this enclosure over here. And it's a decent enclosure. It's very simple. It's nothing too substantial. Nothing too crazy. But last time I was here, this enclosure had nothing in it. Like, this is like 2 years ago, whatever. 1 or 2 years ago. And I didn't pay much mind to it. It's just another prairie dog enclosure. But then when I was here earlier this year, we saw this enclosure and it looked like this. And we were like, what is this? What's this for? There's a net over it. You're not allowed to go. Like, what is this? And I was like, it's probably a prairie dog enclosure, because I couldn't remember the last time I visited. It was clearly a prairie dog enclosure. We can also see Peafall there. Hi, good sir. But then you're walking around here, and we didn't notice this. But look at all the dirt. And look at all the holes in the dirt. And then look at the fact that they've put food next to the holes in the dirt. Yeah, I'm guessing the prairie dogs just escaped out of their enclosure, and they're just free roaming now. And the zoo was just like, yeah, I guess this is just, we'll just have to roll with it. So this is a picture made by Wildlife Quest, who I'm pretty sure allowed me to show it. Maybe I should have double checked. I'm sure it's fine. Thanks for the picture, Brian. I think it's so funny. Anyway, here is Wildlands. This is definitely the largest enclosure in this video, with the most prairie dogs, I'm pretty sure, because they have an absolute ton of them. And it's very nicely themed. I will say, small pet peeve, like small criticism, you've got all this space to create a nice immersive habitat, really. You could really easily make this in such a way that you don't see that wooden fence in the back there. Just make the dirt a bit taller, make the fence a bit lower. Something can be done here to make this more immersive. And it would have been so cool. So yeah, that fence really kind of is a bit of a bummer, if you ask me. Anyway, did you hear that? What I was talking about earlier in Amersfoort was how cool it is to actually hear those prairie dog noises without the need of a speaker. And that's exactly what I got at this zoo. So as we're walking around here, we can hear the prairie dogs. I think prairie dog noises is just called barking. They're barking to alert each other, I guess, of my microphone, which is always very intimidating to animals. Yeah, no, this is super cool to see. And this is exactly the type of shot that I want to be able to get more in this zoo, because at that point over there, exactly, you did not see that wooden fence behind them very well. And it would be cool to have more of that. But yeah, still really awesome enclosure. Really big fan of this. It's just so cool to have a prairie dog enclosure of this size and the magnitude. Yeah, awesome theming as well, with all the Western type stuff. After you go past this enclosure, you also get into a little bit of a Western town type thing. I guess the only other complaint I would have with this enclosure is that it's very randomly put in the middle of an Africa area. Like, you start this part of the zoo, Serenga, in an African village. Then you get the prairie dog enclosure, and then you're back in Africa with the hippo. It's really weird, but I mean, it's a cool enclosure nonetheless, so who cares? It's cool. I like it a lot. So yeah, here we have a small peek of the exit of that walkthrough area, which actually splits into two at the end here, for no real reason. I guess it's nice if you're doing a loop of the zoo that you have different paths to pick from. And then as we turn around, you see a little bit of that Western town type area where there's a little food shop and stuff like that. But we'll see that in more detail if we ever end up doing a zoo tour of Wildlands, which is definitely something I do intend, because it's a very inspirational zoo. But that was it for Wildlands, so let's move on to Wonderwereld ter Apel. And I'm pretty sure that this is the prairie dog enclosure. There's a meerkat enclosure next to this one. I could not make out that sign, but I'm pretty sure this is the prairie dog enclosure. I don't know where else it would be in this zoo, so let's just assume it's this one. Nothing much here to see. It's it's an enclosure, I guess. Next up we have Zie-Zoo, which once again, really cool theming over here with the kind of railroad and the western stuff. There's also these doves, which I guess make this a shared enclosure in a way. And that other cabin over there, or train cabin with the logs, is actually their indoor area. They can get inside of that, and there's even a glass viewing as well. But we can also see just tons of little bits of theming, more branches over there for those doves to fly to, I suppose, if they so want to. And yeah, it's a pretty cool enclosure. I'm a fan. It's on the flat side, but yeah, you can see that glass viewing into their indoor area over there. I guess that's also for the doves, judging by the branches inside. Anyway, this is the Zonnegloed, right across from the mute swan enclosure. They were building a brand new Prairiedog enclosure over here. This is all the footage I got from it, so that's all you're getting. I'm sorry. But yeah, they're building one, I suppose. And then over here at Zoom Erlebniswelt, it took me forever to find this, because I did not remember seeing any Prairiedogs here, and that's because, just like the Zonnegloed, they were still building it. So this is, I'm pretty sure, the brand new Prairiedog enclosure that when I was there, the Prairiedogs were yet to be released into. But that's it. So enjoy some more Prairiedog barking, but I'm going to sign off right here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!